A city of 5 million people, though, placed under a curfew in peacetime. It is extraordinary. Melbourne and its citizens forced into this extreme lockdown. Livelihoods are going to be destroyed. Many lives disrupted. Everybody's lives disrupted. And essential freedoms denied. After 8 o'clock at night, Victorians are not allowed now to leave home, save for some very basic exemptions. I just think this is madness. Premier Daniel Andrews says he is being logical, yet he's inflicting enormous pain and hardship on his state in order to suppress a virus that will then still be with us. This takes the overreaction of the state premiers to a horrible new level. As you know, this is not a partisan problem. We've got premiers and politicians of all political persuasions who have been wildly in favour of lockdowns, shutdowns, restrictions and all sorts of impractical measures since the pandemic began. In South Australia today, with 2 new cases, just 2 new cases, both from known sources, the Liberal Premier Stephen Marshall has imposed stricter restrictions on home gatherings and on bars and restaurants. This is outrageous, inflicting more pain on the people of South Australia on the basis of just 2 cases. And Tasmania, which was going to open its borders to West Australians, South Australians and Territorians later in the week, has now delayed that another month, citing fears of a second wave. Citizens need to start questioning and challenging their politicians because their heavy-handed approach is uncalled for, it's damaging and it's ultimately could be self-defeating. What is their plan? How do they think we'll be operating in 6 months' time or in a year? This crisis has created a horrible unity ticket between the nanny state right and the authoritarian left. And what's missing is any discussion or planning, any idea of where this will end. There is no vaccine. So how many lockdowns do our premiers suggest we will have? We've destroyed 1 million jobs and spent 3 decades worth of debt on one national lockdown. Does anyone seriously suggest we could do that again in the spring or next year? So why were we doing this to ourselves now? We were told we needed to flatten the curve and we had to shut down to try and make sure we could get our health system ready. We were told we might lose 150,000 lives and we built up 7,500 critical care beds. And now Melbourne is in curfew when there are fewer than 50 out of 7,500 critical care beds being used nationally under this pandemic. All of this is unsustainable. We've got great sympathy for everyone who's died and their families from this coronavirus pandemic, all the families who have suffered. And we need to keep going with slowing the spread, with masks, with social distancing and with working from home where possible. We've got to get better at protecting the vulnerable, especially in aged care homes. But imposing a wartime curfew on all Melburnians for 6 weeks, it's going to hurt more people than it helps. Since this began, we've lost twice as many Australians to car crashes than we have to the virus. Unless there's a vaccine, and many experts now are downplaying those hopes, unless there's a vaccine, we're going to have to find ways to live with the virus, slow its spread, protect the vulnerable, treat patients better. But curfews and shutdowns add to the pain without eliminating the eventual problem. Of course, we'd all jump on board in a moment if we knew how to get rid of the disease for good. Now, Scott Morrison, of course, as you just saw, he's publicly supported Daniel Andrews' actions. What else could he do? Whatever he thinks, the Prime Minister couldn't openly undermine the Premier's actions. That would make it look like he's encouraging civil disobedience. But Anthony Albanese doesn't want any debate. He doesn't want any politicians questioning what the Andrews Labor government is doing. That's how ridiculous this is getting. A government locks down our second largest city and we're told it should not even be questioned.
Mr Morrison needs to get his backbench in line because it is unacceptable. The comments of Craig Kelly, the comments of Tim Wilson similarly, and many others are completely unacceptable. And I think that, quite frankly, the actions of the Victorian Liberal Party opposition stand in stark contrast to what we have done.
The tragic irony for Victorians is that the Premier who's locking them down, making them prisoners in their own homes, is the same Premier who failed to keep the disease in quarantine. Maybe it's that failure that's driving his overreaction now. On Channel 9's 60 Minutes last night, we saw just how shambolic the Melbourne quarantine system turned out to be. They spoke to a security guard who was recruited via WhatsApp He wasn't interviewed, he was paid below award wages, and he worked across 6 quarantine hotels over 2 months. And have a listen to the training he got.
When I reached there, I asked him, so what are my duties and what I'm supposed to do? He said, go on this floor and ask the other security guard what you're supposed to do. So I went on the floor and I asked the other security guard, and he was like, oh, it's also my first day here. Yeah, that's a bit strange, yeah. Yeah, that was his first day, and then he told me that if someone comes out of the room, we just have to tell them, don't come out of the room, stay inside your room, and that's it. I think that was all. That's my induction, or whatever you call it.
According to this man, the guards didn't wear masks, even when mixing with known positive cases, and they came and went from local fast food stores. And then, of course, there was the fraternising.
Did you hear about them sleeping with some of the guests?
Yes. I was told that a guard has sex with the guest, yes.
This was supposed to be quarantine, and quite clearly it was nothing of the kind. But perhaps even more amazing was the lack of testing.
While return travellers Ricky Singh and Kate Hislop were locked up, they took the pandemic seriously, but felt no one else did. Were either of you tested for coronavirus?
No.
At any point during that 2-week period?
No, not at all.
You were not tested once in 2 weeks
Not
as
once.
return travellers?
No, it was definitely a shock to both of us, yeah.
It's not on, to be honest. I don't understand it.
This is nothing short of a disgrace, of course, and the government that treated quarantine like a house party is now forcing Victorians to quarantine in their own homes. Look, we are all in this together and we all want to get on top of this thing. But to put this into perspective, if you measure the seriousness of the pandemic by deaths per million people, there are 127 countries, 127, who are facing a worse crisis than we are. Some of them have death tolls per capita that are 50 times, even 100 times higher than Australia's. Victoria has almost 6,500 active cases. That's about 1 in every 1,000 people in the state being infected. And there are 416 patients in hospital, 35 of them in intensive care. The real disaster has been in aged care homes. Victoria's Parliament was supposed to sit tomorrow, but it's been suspended. The National Parliament sitting has also been delayed. We need our politicians back on the job debating this issue and these policies and working out a plan for the next 6 months, not 6 weeks, the next year and beyond. No one's pretending this is easy. There are a series of bad options and you just need to find the least worst one. It's about finding something close to the right balance, because we run the risk of inflicting enormous damage on this country for generations to come, pretending we can eradicate a disease that will be with us for years to come.